Hello, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Today we're going to shift a little bit into a different direction than where we've been over the last number of weeks, and not going to talk about the one big beautiful bill again. We'll pick up on that, I'm sure, on topics as we get closer to the end of the year and we get more clarity. Today I would, and probably in your profession too, but in many of our professions we have kind of these education requirements, and as an accountant, of course, both on the state and federal level with licensing, there's a lot of continuing ed, a lot of articles we read, things of that nature, and as a tax professional, we're kind of guided, or at least boundaries set on what's called IRS code. Circular 230. So the Circular 230 is a circular that kind of just simply states, okay, these are the areas that you need to make sure that you operate within. You know, manner of acting, etc. What are you required to know? What are you required to get from the client? You know, and so it kind of outlined a little bit of a framework for us to maintain our licenses with the IRS. And so I was kind of reading through this, and of course with a lot of changes that have been coming into place, and so kind of reading through and working through continuing ed, and I kind of just put this together, kind of an application of some of these areas of Circular 230, and not only and I think you'll get some information as it relates to as far as on the tax side, but also I think some implementation or some areas that are pretty good as far as implementation for ourselves into our business. So there are kind of three big areas that are talked about in Circular 230. First is that of competence. Second, diligence as to accuracy. And third, dealing with conflicts of interest. So kind of talk on these three areas and kind of straddle a little bit the tax and what's required on our end from a professional standpoint, and then maybe how it applies to all of us. So the competence section. And so this section requires, and this goes beyond test. I mean, anybody can pass the test, but to actually have the knowledge and the skill that's necessary, that's required to be able to do the work, and then also a willingness to be thorough through any sort of processes. And this is true in any business, right? If we're going to be effective as business owners, we're going to be effective in our skill and our trade, and we're not only going to have to possess that knowledge, but we also have to be willing to be thorough. So as I sit in here, and then the gentleman that records, Josh, Kohler Media, a shameless plug for him. If you want podcast recording, any sort of media help, social media, whatnot, call Josh. I'm sure colormedia.org.com. What is it? Colormedia.com. There we go. Shameless plug. Do I get a discount for that?
Yes.
No, I won't. Okay. So anyway, but these particular areas that the IRS look at first is competence. So do you have the skill set? You should have the skill set of whatever you're doing, but really kind of a conscientious effort to be thorough in continuing to learn, thorough in the work. And so you come in every day, and you're not just kind of halfway doing it. I kind of shut off maybe words I shouldn't use, but kind of, just come in and just put half the effort in, just kind of casually do it. You're not going to have a successful business. And the IRS looks at us as tax professionals and says, you better be competent, you better possess the knowledge, and you better be thorough in your work, and thorough and also in the process. I'm not a process guy. I have 2 employees, and both of those that work for me that specifically work in these areas and kind of helps me. Because I don't know what I'm doing, but really kind of help with the process and kind of keeping us keeping our head where they need to be, keeping us on course. So possessing the knowledge. Next, proper preparation, so to understand the laws and procedures applied to the situation. And so regardless of the type of business that we're in, we need to have a basic understanding of certain of the areas legally that apply to us, as well as procedures as they apply specifically to your line of work. Next, and this was actually talked about in Circular 230, no one to ask for help. And this is kind of one thing, and I was having a conversation earlier on, even in my career, and you may have as well. We're small, we're kind of trying to figure things out, and we want to do everything. We want to do the next thing that's going to make us money, the next thing's going to make that contact, whatever the case may be. And then we get to the point to where we get overwhelmed and we don't know how to ask for help. So kind of have that mindset right off the bat. When you're starting a company, wherever you're at now, be willing to ask for help. You're actually not going to be good at most things inside of business. With this podcast recording, do I have the knowledge to do it? Yeah, I mean, I've worked switch boards for media events. I mean, I've operated cameras for large events. That's the skill set I have. Like, can I do this software thing and editing and all? Forget about it. So why in the world am I going to obtain that now? No, I need to ask for help. So that's why I bring people in. I've had different people work with me in this particular area. I don't know what I'm doing. I simply get in front of the camera, I record, but I hand it off to someone that knows what they're doing to be able to get the work done. So know when to ask for help, know when to research. There's another provision that's in there. Be aware when you don't know something and either hand it off to someone else who does know what they're doing or do the research. But either way, you're always going to want to be doing research in your area to improve your particular skill set. And the last, kind of understanding, this is an in Circular 230, but kind of a comment that I made here that I've written down here, but incompetence results in a lack of trust. So if you're a business owner, you're working inside of a business, whatever the case may be, if you can't find yourself going and being able to trust anyone because you think you know it all, guess what? You're going to find yourself very incompetent. So be very willing to ask for help. Being very willing to do the research, then to put that work in, but also know when to ask good questions and to know when to ask questions. Don't leave yourself in a position of incompetence. There are certain areas I know through the years when trying to grow my business, I wasn't competent in those areas, and I found it really kind of came back to bite me in the backside. So incompetence will result in a lack of trust. So if I'm not competent in my work and there's areas that if I'm talking to clients all the time, I promise you most of my clients will probably be able to tell you areas that I am very competent and areas I may not be as good. And because I try to, and not always, but I try to simply say, I'm not quite sure. I kind of have a guess, but I really don't know this. And we should all take that approach. Let me find out and get back to you. So first area, that of competence. Second, diligence as to accuracy. And of course, when we talk about accounting and numbers and anything in the world of finance or tax, accuracy is absolutely key. But being diligent toward accuracy. So this means verifying the accuracy of the information provided and knowing the right question to ask. Okay, so the first part, the verifying the accuracy, that's all fine and good, but I think even maybe more importantly is knowing the question to ask. So diligence to accuracy, this literally means verifying the accuracy of the information provided, as well as knowing the right question to ask. It's kind of applied here. Next here, exercise reasonable care and thoroughness in preparation, representation, and advising. So these are terms that are in there. So exercising reasonable care and thoroughness in the preparation process. So anything that you're doing inside of your business, whether it's interaction with a team member, whether it's interaction with the client or in the work itself, making sure that there's reasonable care and that there's thoroughness in the work. Everything's being done. There's not any sort of circles that haven't been closed or holes that haven't been filled in, etc. Make sure you're making reasonable inquiries and asking for substantiation. And so in the tax world, if someone comes to me and tells me that here are all my expenses, generally we're going to ask for some sort of validation, some sort of verification. And the reason that we do this is because we're required to. Okay, but this is kind of a mindset we need to take all around, is make sure that we're generally asking good questions and making reasonable inquiries inside of our business, outside of our business, but kind of inside of our business, making sure we're making those. I'll give you just kind of a practical example. Even in this process today of recording, I've asked a lot of questions. Okay, and because I want to make sure that I understand from those who do understand what I need to do. Okay, and so I want to make sure when I've gone through, I was very diligent in the study, and I went through and I have around here somewhere, but kind of the magazines and information that I went through to make sure the information I was given, and even in these podcasts, was accurate. Really try to make sure that we're diligent as it relates to everything that we say is as accurate as it possibly can be. Make sure that we're maintaining comprehensive records. Kind of as a sidebar with the IRS, you do need to hold on to your information for at least 3 years. Next thing I've written down here is you cannot defer responsibility. One thing I've seen especially with this wave of AI, that everybody wants to go to AI to ask questions. And I even did kind of going through even recently, for podcast, because you can't help it. You go through and you type in, in your search engine, you get this AI result anymore. We'd have, Copilot in Microsoft products. We have just about everywhere we go now, there's this AI component. And what I have found that, especially when it comes to the world of tax, that most of that information is either completely incorrect, only partially correct, has certain elements of truth. A lot of times, especially if things get a little more complex, it's not there. So we want to make sure that the information that we have is actually accurate, and we don't have the mindset of deferring responsibility. Oh, well, AI told me this, or this person told me. Make sure that we're putting in the work and make sure that everything that we're saying is accurate and doing is accurate. And then lastly here, not relying on primary authority and understanding the nuances of a situation. So if we're going through and we don't understand the nuances, so if I'm working with a client when it comes to tax or accounting, whatever the case may be, if I don't get into the detail, if I don't have an understanding of those nuances that it applies to that particular person, that particular family, that particular customer, I'm going to miss the mark. And this is true regardless. I don't care if I'm selling couches, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, having that conversation to make sure that I understand the nuances that relate to that particular client, because I'm not going to give accurate, good information if I don't understand and I'm not aware of those particular nuances. And then lastly for today, number 3, conflict of interest. And so as a tax professional, and even as an accountant, I cannot do a tax return if there's a conflict of interest. Okay, so if there's a conflict of interest, I generally am not able to do the tax return. In a lot of areas, if there's a conflict of interest, there does need to be a waiver signed. That's also true in my world as well. If we're going through and there is a conflict of interest, there are things that can be signed to possibly work through it. But what is conflict of interest? Doing representation of one person would be adverse to someone else. So if I'm representing one client, if say for example, if I have say a husband and a wife, or a couple that used to be married and they've since divorced. They were clients when I had them, and this has happened many times, and then they end up having a marital dissolution, getting divorced. I can no longer, without proper paperwork being completed, be able to complete both returns. But that is going to be a conflict of interest, because I can't have. I may not be able to give good information that is most helpful to both parties. I really should be focusing on one or the other. So for conflict of interest, a risk is this: that the responsibilities to one client limit the responsibility to another client. And then next, avoiding conflict of interest is essential for justice, maintaining trust, and upholding ethical standards. And this is kind of the takeaway that I want to kind of put out there as it relates to this. Understanding that in business, most of us are going to run across a conflict of interest at some point inside of our work or inside of our life somewhere. By us violating a conflict of interest, okay, then at that point we're going to have issues with giving good, I would say fair, even just, or being able to operate a fair or just manner. You're going to probably end up losing the trust of one or both of the parties. And then your ethics may end up getting questioned as well. So making sure that we're avoiding any sort of conflict of interest. And then my last comment for today: decisions are best made when based on merit, data, and well-developed and implemented procedures, conduct, and systems. So when it comes to making good decisions are best made when those decisions are based on merit, on data, and well-developed and implemented procedures, conduct, as well as systems. So this is Josh Belk with Belk on Business Podcast. Hope this particular podcast brought you some value. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Have a wonderful day.